Hey guys, just ended this stream with some very good news. But appreciate all you guys that attended the stream this morning. Birthday stream, if you will, 30th birthday stream. You guys were amazing, very interactive. Remember, the member only stream is tomorrow at 4 p.m. Central Time, and then the regular stream will be Sunday at 5 p.m. So we got some great news, and I'm not showing this. I'm not showing this to gloat. I'm not showing this to say, hey, look at me, I was right, or anything like that. Like, believe it or not, that's not the case. This is actually good news, and you can assess this in whatever way that you may. These are experts that are saying this. So there's two doctors that we've talked about on stream before, one of which was very, very skeptical, and Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, and skeptical of the mortality rate in terms of he thought it was way lower than a lot of his colleagues thought. Initially. And we also talked about Dr. John Ioannidis. Both of these guys are Stanford University. And we've talked about them both. We talked about both of them on stream and in video. And there's some good news that came out. Finally, you're seeing that the antibody tests are starting to roll out. And that's going to really put into perspective the infected rate versus because what we know about the Modelovirus, as we call it on this channel, we know what the confirmed cases are. We know what the confirmed deaths are, but we have not been able to really put into perspective how many people have been infected, weren't showing symptoms, have been showing symptoms, all of that stuff. And a lot of this stuff really has a lot to do with some of the models that these guys are supposed to be building out that, we can say, unfortunately, led to a lot of policies with this indiscriminate, to me, very illogical shutdown. Indiscriminate shutdown, even though we know that the virus itself, in terms of who it impacts and who's at certain different risk, depending on what demographics that you belong to, and it's not equal, right? It impacts different people different ways, and you're more likely to be at this risk depending on what age you are. But the finding itself, which I have linked into my description, is, that is the wrong one. In my description is here. This is one of the first major findings, again, surrounding the antibody test. And what did they conclude? Well, they concluded that, and this is based out of this sampling that they were doing out in Santa Clara, right? Yeah, Santa Clara County, right? And what did they conclude? These prevalence estimates represent a range between 48,000 and 81,000 people infected in Santa Clara by early April, 50 and 85-fold more than the number of confirmed cases. Now you look at that and be like, oh no, it's worse than what we thought. No, obviously those people aren't dead. But what it's saying is, and they go into more conclusions. So it says conclusions: the population prevalence of SARS-CoV-2 antibodies in Santa Clara County implies that the infection is much more widespread than indicated by the number of confirmed cases. Population prevalence estimates can now be used to calibrate epidemic and mortality projections. So you're going to see people revising their models, revising their projections, but we kind of knew this, but I think people didn't really want to accept it. Unfortunately, people started clinging to the narratives. They started clinging to the narratives. They didn't want to accept that maybe this was already at a level spread out a lot more than what they initially thought, which of course would bring the infected mortality rate down. It's always important to understand what denominator and such that they're using when they're trying to determine these fatality rates. But the infected mortality rate or fatality rate is going to be lower, significantly lower than what it is if you are just comparing it versus confirmed deaths and confirmed infected, right? So look, this is this study. We've seen this sort of, I talked about Iceland and others. We've seen this sort of duplicated in other areas, but this is really, Johnny Anita said this has the potential to become one of the biggest evidence fiascos of all time. And I'm not saying that it's there yet. And I'm sure he's not even saying that yet. There's got to be more tests and stuff ran. But what we do know, at very minimum, and you can take this for whatever reason that you may, or whatever way that you may, the infected is much higher than what initially, what was more so than what the confirmed cases are. So there's people that have it that don't know they have it and have had it and didn't know they ever had it. I even talked about with Rand Paul, who he was talking about his experience. He's one of the congressmen that ended up actually contracting it. And he said the only reason he even went to the doctor to get tested was because he had been traveling. It wasn't because he was sick, or like not necessarily sick, and depending on how you define that. But he said he had a very mild symptomatic case of it, where, again, he said, he was like, fine. Lord knows how many people have been walking around like this. Now, you may look at that and say that is terrible, but logically, it seems that you look at that and say, well, that means it's not as deadly as initially projected. You've already seen numbers being revised down. Those numbers are being revised down. Talk about the IHME or IMHE model, the Washington State model, where they had been revising down those numbers. I believe it's now to like 60,000 projected deaths. And that doesn't mean that they didn't account for extreme social distancing. No, they always did. It's just obviously new data tells the bigger story. But what we do know from what this tells us, at least, and I'm sure there'll be other tests ran, but what it looks like is that, let's say 50 to 85 fold more than the confirmed cases. There's a way more people, not just like a slight significant, I'm talking significantly more people that are infected with the Modelovirus than there are those confirmed cases. This is great news. There's no need to gloat on it. This is great news because this means that it's not as deadly. Doesn't mean don't take your precautions or anything like that. It's just not as deadly, certainly as people have projected, and not as deadly as people maybe have anticipated. And unfortunately impeded on people's freedoms in the process. But hey, we'll see what happens. We'll see more tests being ran. Let me know what you guys think.